So every day I followed up pretty much twice a day. And sometime later, I think it was about 10 days later, he called me and he said, guess what? We're going to send you to our Quebec office, Montreal, for an interview with my business partners. And there were a few owners to the company. So they flew me to Montreal and they said, if you're willing to spend that much time and effort to get a job, we can imagine how much time you'd spend to keep a job.
So good morning and welcome to another episode of Better Business, Better Life. Today I am joined by a Canadian guest, which is Glenn Poulos, who is the VP and GM of Gap Wireless. He's also a business coach and now he's the best-selling author just recently of a book called Never Sit in the Lobby. Welcome to the show, Glenn. Lovely to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me, Deborah. Good morning to you and to your guests. Or your listeners. So we've just been having a bit of a chat, as we always do before we get onto these podcasts. I've been hearing the story about Glenn, which is really fascinating. I'd love you to share your journey, because you've had 2 successful exits in business. You've now written a book. You're sharing that expertise with others. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now. Great. Happy to share that. The part of the story I really love to tell is how I made the transition from being a federal government worker, a civil servant, as we call them in Canada. It was a technical role, and it was the weather service in Canada. And my boss pulled me aside and said, "You're not, you're working too fast. You're working too hard. You need to go get a job somewhere else. And I recommend you get into sales." And so, because I was technical, I reached out to a job for a technical sales rep job. It was only one, and I sent in a resume. I think it's pretty much the only resume I'd ever written. And because the government hired me right out of school, I didn't even need a resume. And to make a long story short, the guy interviewed me and sent me on my way. And the next morning, I phoned the receptionist at the company and said, did I get the job? And she's like, well, we're still looking at candidates. So I'm like, okay. And so that afternoon I called back and I said, what about now? And she's like, dude, we're still looking at candidates. I'm like, okay. So the next day I called and I said, the man's name was Kim. I said, is Kim there? No, he's busy. And I'm like, okay. Have you made a decision? No, Glenn, we'll get back to you. Okay. So every day I followed up pretty much twice a day. And sometime later, I think it was about 10 days later, he called me and he said, guess what? We're going to send you to our Quebec office, Montreal, for an interview with my business partners. And there were a few owners to the company. So they flew me to Montreal. At the time, I was driving around fixing government equipment at weather stations, driving the cheapest car money could buy. It was like a Chevy Chevette with manual windows, no air conditioning, no radio, government green. It was this crappy car, and I never thought much of it. But when the owner of the company in Quebec picked me up at the airport, he was driving a BMW 750, and I'm like, wow, this sales game is really interesting. And I was only 20 something at the time, and pretty impressionable, right? And so we pulled into his office, and the other 2 partners' cars were parked there as well. And they all had matching BMW 750s with license plates that were 1 digit apart. And I said, I'm definitely getting a job in sales. And so they interviewed me, sent me back, and he eventually hired me. And shortly after he hired me, he said, I just want to share with you that you were not the candidate we wanted to hire. He said, you weren't even on the list of candidates we wanted to hire. And I'm like, okay, well, why did you hire me then? And he said, because you were the only one that followed up twice a day for 10 days. And they said, if you're willing to spend that much time and effort to get a job, we can imagine how much time you'd spend to keep a job. And so I worked with them for 5 years, and I approached them after 5 years about spinning off part of their company into a separate company that them and I would own, but I would sort of get to run this division and they would get to enjoy the benefits of that. And I was going to focus on this newfangled technology. And they said, "Oh, write us a plan, and we'll let you know why it's probably just won't work, and you're better off just staying where you're at." And and so the next day I resigned. I'd only been married for 6 days, and yeah, and I went home to my wife. I said, "Oh, guess what? I quit." And she's like, "What?" And but anyways, I quit. And that newfangled technology, which never went anywhere, is called the cell phone, right? And of course, that never amounted to anything.
No.
And and so the business was focused on wireless, mobile wireless, and ran the business with some partners for 15 years, sold that business. And then I left that business and ended up starting a similar, the similar customer-based business, selling slightly different products, and ran it for another 15 years, and just sold that in February to a U.S. private equity, and a company they bought in the U.S. bought us. And so I'm now, this company that I've been running for 15 years, Gap Wireless, we're now part of a much bigger U.S. company, and I agreed to stay on with them for a few years and help them, work in the business. And I'm pretty much doing the same job running Canada. And and that's how I got to where I am today.
Wow, that's one hell of a story. So your wife obviously forgave you in the end.
She did indeed.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And more importantly, did you actually get the BMW in your
Yeah.
sales
So,
job?
well, it's funny because I turned into a Mercedes driver, and similar type of car, similar, from the same part of the world. But yeah, I ended up becoming a Mercedes driver, and I love them to death, actually. Yeah.
Excellent.
Love that car.
Hey, great story. Now, this book, I believe, actually launched on the same week that you sold the business. So
that's
tell
true.
us a little bit about the book and where did that come from?
Yeah,
overnight success, right? It was just
for sure. Yeah, it was just a few weeks ago in 1985, and so yeah, I started when I had the actually privilege of working with some really grassroots salespeople at this company that when I left the government, and the main owner of that company, the president, he's one of those consummate salespeople, and not like when you think peddler, guy banging on doors selling encyclopedias, but I mean just amazed you how great he was with customers, and never really got stumped, when you think, oh, what would I say if I got asked that? Or he just always was great at handling objections, and he was just such a professional, and I really paid close attention to what he did, and I started to learn some of his, we'll call them tricks, but they weren't, he was just, these are just tips on how to do it right, really, and so I started seeing them, and I started seeing other things in other people, and I started writing them down and naming them after people. And then I started noticing some mistakes, started writing those down. Then I started sort of sharing them in a joking way, saying like, oh, you just did a Barry Watson or something like that. And everyone's like, oh, what's a Barry Watson? And I'm like, oh, that's when you do this and this. And they're like, oh, that's hilarious, and you should write a book. And, so, it wasn't until many years later, and really it was during the pandemic that when I had a lot of free time, as we all did, stuck at home, that I decided to, put pen to paper and get cracking on writing the book. And so during that part of the pandemic, where it was, the major lockdown, I worked on it. And then, that's when I had enough words, I started working with the editors, and, was able to launch it in February of 2022,
Brilliant. That's absolutely. And I know that you shared with me that, writing a book came with some discipline, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that sort of journey.
Yeah. So I tried writing it actually probably 10 years ago, and I got a little bit here and a little bit there. And, I actually found a tool, Scrivener, I think it's called, and that helps authors to write. And I was able to get a lot of the rules written in as titles and things, which was very helpful. And I had always kept it up to date, but I'd never really done any decent writing. And because I wasn't really disciplined at it, and it wasn't a core competency really. And so I basically Googled, how do you write a book? And which is pretty much what everyone does for everything nowadays, right?
Yep.
And so it said, a podcast came on, and the guy said, just write 500 words a day until you're done, and then you're done. And anyone can write a book. and don't stop writing those words until 500 are done. Like, don't do 50 and then go get a coffee and, take a break, go for a walk, just sit down, write 500. And so I had decided that as a compromise, because I couldn't really do it every day based on my work schedule, that I was going to write 2,000 to 2,500 words every Saturday and Sunday. And so I committed to it, and I started, and I would get up early on the weekends, and I would take each one of the chapters that I had outlined, and I had quite a few of them, and I was able to get basically 75,000 words down in short order. And as I had shared with you earlier, as I said, once it got to the editor, and the lady shared with me, she said, "Glenn, you can't swear that much in a book." And so we agreed to take out the 4,000 copies of the F word, and I ended up finalizing on 71,000 words as the book length.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
yeah, she said you can swear, you can get 3 F's and a goddamn or something like that, but other than that, you
is that it? Is that the
yeah.
limit?
So yeah. And so I said, okay, fine. And but yeah, in all seriousness, it's about 71,000 words.
And so what is the purpose of the book? Like, if somebody's sitting here listening to it, what would they get out of reading that book?
So basically the book is kind of like a how-to for the person that visits customers. It's very well geared for it. There's other rules about being a good salesperson that can be applied to sort of people maybe that work online and stuff like that. These are just general rules on rapport and things like that. But where it really resonates is with the person that has to be face-to-face with customers, right? Of course, we all, kind of had this jostling with the pandemic where we kind of, that all ended and evaporated, right? But right up until like March 20th, 2020, I mean, in Canada at least, I mean, our people needed to be in front of customers every day, right? There was no such thing as WFH, work from home, and Zoom was there, but I mean, nobody had it. And it was really a moment in time. And I mean, we've been struggling as much as we can to get back in front of each one of our customers as quickly as possible. And so more now than ever, people are like, oh, how do I get back in front of the customer? What do I say? This and that. And so these are tips that, you can open up to any page and sort of learn a tip on just different aspects of selling. And you don't have to start at the beginning and read the entire book in order to get the message. It's not a formulaic approach. It's not like the challenger sales model or spin selling, where each one of the chapters is sort of a prerequisite to what comes next. And it's not a system. It's a series of 57 rules and tips on how to build a business and a career in selling. And that's what it is. Some of them are very short and sweet. Some of them are more rambling on in terms of the meaning and stuff. And you'll be surprised, it covers everything from, the title, Never Sit in the Lobby, right? Yeah. And to how to behave at a dinner with customers and vendors, because I saw a lot of the right way to do it and a lot of the wrong way to do it when I was, throughout my entire career, but especially when I was younger, and I'd see lots of junior salespeople and what have you, like behaving poorly and that not knowing how to behave properly in a business environment. So, I chose to write all those down for people to learn, and other tips and tricks on how to get and stay in front of customers.
Love it. So what's been the biggest mistake that you've seen people make, whether they be young or old, but in sales, what's the biggest thing that you see?
Well, one of the biggest ones I see a lot is, one of a big one, maybe not the biggest, but it's called, it's in the book, and it's called implied familiarity also breeds contempt. And so, and it's a rule, it's part of the rapport series in the book. And I don't know if you've ever heard the story or the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you go away with 6 friends in a van driving somewhere across New Zealand or whatever. And by the time you get home, talk to 4 of them, if you know what I mean, right? Yes. You know the joke there. And, yep. But I made up this one called implied familiarity also breeds contempt. And it's easiest to understand it by the story that I tell, which is going into a customer, and the guy has a photo behind his desk, and he was with another man holding the thing. And I said to him, oh wow, you're a fisherman, and looks like you're a bass fisherman or whatever. That's amazing. Maybe we should go fishing sometime or whatever. And the guy looks over his shoulder and he goes, oh my God. He goes, that, you know what? That's my ex-father-in-law. He goes, we're divorced now. I actually can't stand that guy. And I actually effing hate fishing too. Grabs the photo, throws it away. And, the whole idea is that by making that assumption that he, just because there was a photo there and he was holding a fish, that he loved fishing and it was all part of his thing. And that's what he did every weekend. You're making all these assumptions that you really shouldn't. And there's a lot more rapport building required before you just invite the guy to go fishing on the weekend, right?
It's a little bit weird.
Yeah, exactly. It's just too much, too soon, too fast, right? And it's fake and it's phony. And even nowadays, especially, people are like hypersensitive to those kinds of things. They're just more aware with with media and social media of, hey, you're just, that's just fake rapport. Right. And so I always challenge people to, try to build genuine rapport with people. I love the saying, God gave you two ears and one mouth. So, you do the math. And, I talk a lot in the book about active listening. And there's even an exercise and a game in there that I challenge you to play with your spouse or partner or what have you, where you can only say a very short group of things like, oh my, really? What happened next? How did that make you feel? Oh my God. And there's 5 or 6 of them listed, and you're not allowed to say anything. And then you have to go home and try to trigger a conversation, but just say those things and then see how the conversation goes. And quite often what you end up finding out is that the person like, oh man, it was really great talking to you tonight. You're such a good listener. Right. And, because people really they don't want a lot of advice. They don't want cliche, suggestions and advice. They just want to be heard. They just want to tell you the story to get it off of their chest or what have you. Right. And so, I share a lot on rapport in the book, actually.
I suspect that's particularly good for husbands and wives. I know that
yes, for sure.
Husbands definitely have a tendency to want to jump in and sort of solve the problem that you don't actually.
Yes,
really
exactly. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, and now I'm going to go back a little bit to your business now outside of the
Sure.
book, because obviously we actually met through a pod match, which is a podcasting sort
Right.
of what do you call it, sort of online dating almost. But your business that you run, Gap Wireless, actually runs on EOS, and you're working with my fellow EOS implementers, Al.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about your business, and because it's fantastic you've been able to sell it, obviously at a good time. How the journey to go from being what was effectively a startup to being a 41 person business that was then sold to a much bigger business. Can you share a little bit of that journey with us?
Yeah. We started on our EOS journey about 3 years ago. We were going into our 3rd annual. We've been at like a full 3 years, I believe, or maybe it's our 4th annual. And so, but around the 2018, 2019 timeframe, anyways, I'd realized that I have this sort of it's not a saying, but just this thing where whenever I get scared about the future, the business level or something like that, like and right now the economy in North America, it's feeling questionable, right? It may be the same in New Zealand, and but it feels like 2023 is not going to be as financially lucrative as 2022 was, right? For real estate's down and all that, business spending, layoffs and what have you, right? So the natural reaction is that you get paranoid or whatever, right? And so my natural reaction when I feel that feeling coming on is to just do a whole lot of crap, right? And so, right, like rather than cower in fear, I'm like, let's just do something, right? Like, and I mean, and I'm very passionate about it with the people. I'm like, we got to do something. We have to do more. Like, and they're like, what? I don't care. Let's just do something, right? And because we're not gonna worry our way out of the problem. We have to sell our way out of the problem, right? And so I realized at the time the business we didn't really have now I have all the vernacular of EOS, so I don't want to taint my feelings back then, because I would start using, but the system, we didn't have an operating system, right? And honestly, I just used Google again. I said, and I don't know what I Googled, but I Googled something along the lines of business systems, right? Mm-hmm. And EOS popped up pretty, probably fairly high up. And I was able to read that it was, a system to help you, structure your business in a, and, cover all aspects of building and growing the business. Right. And I ended up setting up a meeting. I called maybe I filled out the form, and they lined me up with a couple or two or three facilitators in Toronto. And Al was the first one to call me back from his holiday in Greece. And
he's a machine, that man.
Yeah. And I'm also Greek too, by the way. So it was very rapport building that he called me from the homeland. Right. Yeah. But in the end, I just felt that the rapport was best with Al. So we signed on with him. But, we didn't have any of the things really in place that, that EOS calls for. And as a matter of fact, just prior to, it was just after coming out of it, it allowed me to come to another epiphany, which really, I don't want to say saved the business, but that wouldn't be overstating the issue. But in 2019, shortly after we came on with Al, I had realized that we had started to spread ourselves thin and breaking a bunch of my other rules. We had gotten into divisions and departments that we shouldn't have started, and we were taking the big profits from other businesses since day one. And we were feeding these other things that we felt we had the right to be in these other areas of business. And it masks itself for a while because you're making so much money and you don't really, you kind of take your eye off the ball of how well they're doing, and you're doing well. And then one day, the cash cow piece is down a bit. And then you start looking at yourself and say, wait a minute, like, okay, they're down a bit, but why is everything suck so bad? And that's because everything you're making, you're spending on these other efforts in these other departments, in these other areas, geographies, what have you, people. And I came to my business partner on a Monday, and I basically said to him, I said, Mark, we're going to make some changes. I said, right now we're at 80 people, and by noon we'll be at 29. And we let go of all those people, whatever that is, 51 people in one morning, and to restructure the business so that we could become profitable. And we were going to lose almost $1.5 million that year, all because of these, because our core business was down, and it had been fading and funding these other ones, and we had been a little bit too enamored of our own capabilities to realize that we'd let these things run amok. Yeah. And our finance guy.
And you kind of lost track of what your real, the hedgehog concept, what your core focus really was. Yeah. Yeah.
And the whole right person, right seat, and core markets, focus, all of the things we play to, and we identify and review with Al every 90 days. Right. Yeah. And so, it's not as bad as it seems in terms of the number of people. In 40 of them, it was a different division, a service division. And we were already sort of tap dancing with some other companies that might want to take the business over. But that morning we made the call to say, look, can we make a deal this way, that way? And we were able to get a verbal sort of agreement, and that dealt with 40 of them. And then we closed, we let go of the people in the United States that we'd hired, and we weren't managing properly from afar. And there was a small division that we'd also started, and we closed that division, but we sold it we didn't really sell it. We just transferred the assets and the people to a competitor that took all the products at cost, and took the staff without any, without, no one lost the jobs. And in the end, no one really lost their jobs per se, because they were all sort of repositioned elsewhere and what have you. And it worked out reasonably well. And we went on to world record profits for ourselves in the following year, in 2020, and which set the stage for 2021 and 2022 when we sold the business. And we sticked really diligently to the tenets of EOS, and especially, structure first, people second,
Yep.
right person, right seat, and GWC, get it, want it, capacity.
Yep.
And those are and so much so that our American parent, points at our structure and our discipline, like they see it as a disciplined way of operating, as being a model, and they look at themselves and they said, wow, I mean, yeah, we've done well financially in the US, but it's 10 times bigger market, and we don't have any, and they're looking actually to potentially adopting EOS in their US operation. They're actually going to sit in our 2-day next week in order to get a much better feel of it. So yeah, it's been a game changer for us. And that's why I don't see any need, like Al was saying, it's time for you to graduate. And I'm like, why? I mean, I just want to go for my master's and my PhD, right? Like,
yeah. And that's an interesting concept, actually, because a lot of people, we always talk about, we do want people to graduate. We want you to actually teach you how to use the tools, and it becomes part of your everyday way of operating. But it is actually quite helpful to have somebody who can be an external participant and actually run those sessions for you, because we sometimes we can see things because we're looking from the outside in, as opposed to working on the inside and looking at the team around us. So yeah. So I mean, you've talked about some of the tools there already, and for people sitting here thinking about, what is EOS and what will it do for my business? Obviously, that structure first, people second, making sure you've got the right people in the right seats, make sure the GW see the seat. Is there a particular tool that you really like in EOS that sort of was a game changer for you? And I appreciate the whole thing has been a game changer, but is there any one thing that really stands out?
Well, yeah, I always pride myself on trying to be brutally honest. So and I called out myself that the last time we got together with Al for the quarterly, was that I think we'd kind of forgotten of a lot of the tools. And he's like, well, they're all there in the binder. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not self-evident that they're there in a way, and they don't teach you themselves. And so we were just using the basics for the most part, except for a few things like the the core value analysis, where you do the plus minus, plus minus, plus minus. I can't remember what it's called, but
people analyzer,
exactly. And a few of the other ones, but the one that we do use and we have been using, which has been the game changer. And again, I'm not exactly sure if this is what it's called, but it's a clear the air session, right? And that was one of the probably, one of the, although it's probably trademarked or whatever, but in my next book, I point to it as being a game changer, discipline to learn in order to thrive in business with your staff, with your coworkers and compatriots and, other managers and stuff, and just getting through problem times and what have you. The Clear the Air has been a game changer for us. It really has. The other thing, which is the accountability chart, which it's kind of hard for people to understand the accountability chart until you live the accountability chart. And for me, it's like second nature, and I don't, but I'm trying to explain it to them, and I'm like, why can't you get it? It's not that complicated, right? And it's like, well, what's the difference between an org chart and whatever? And I was like, well, it's like an org chart, but it, it's more about what you're accountable for. And I try to show, hey, look, I exist here at the top, but I also exist down here at the bottom, right? Because I'm accountable for that. But when I'm in that box, I'm actually, below another guy, and I'm actually his guy for that, in that box. I'm not the integrator when I'm in that role, right? And they're like, oh, okay. Because I mean, how would the owner of the company report to the warehouse manager, or something, right?
I completely agree. And I think it's certainly something I've seen. I've got one of my clients who's a little bit sort of on the spectrum, who's actually gone ahead and sort of, he's a fast growing business. He's gone ahead and kind of developed his accountability chart for 5 years into the future. Wow. And so he's got all of the different roles that he believes will be there. And I'm sure it will change over time, but he believes they're the roles that will actually be there. And so as a consequence, many of his team are wearing multiple hats. But what it does, it gives them real clarity about which hat are they wearing when they're in that particular meeting. What role do they have in terms of accountability in that particular meeting? And then it also makes it really easy to do the new hires, because when you suddenly find yourself being completely overwhelmed, you look at it and go, right, well, we've got all these hats that I'm wearing right now. What is the most obvious one for us to hire to actually delegate and elevate?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a great tool. It really is. And you're right. It does. I think it's really important for business owners to understand and what accountability role they're playing in which part of the business. So when you're in a meeting, which hat are you wearing?
Right. Yeah. And
Mm.
so I'm trying to, I had sort of touched on it with Al the last time, and now, but a goal of mine is to sort of figure out a way of like getting a better job of learning the other tools and getting them more into the day to day. Because some of them, you have to use them every day, but the other ones are more a resource that you have to reach out for,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like any kind of support. If you don't reach out for the support, it can't help you. Right.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
And so, I do have a personal goal to get a little bit more familiar with some of the other tools in the toolbox that I don't use on a regular basis. Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept, actually. How do we make sure we keep that stuff top of mind? Because you're right, it's such an amazing resource. And all the tools, the reason I fell in love with it, I've been coaching for, I think, almost 15 years now, but I've been running businesses for, let's say, 30 years. And, it's there's all this stuff in there that is really, really helpful, but you don't necessarily know that it's there. I've lost my train of thought, but I'm trying to say it's nothing is rocket science. That's what I was going to say. They are really, really simple. There's nothing in there that you look at and kind of go, wow, this is like absolutely revolutionary. It's all very basic, simple, pragmatic tools that I've sort of been using. But it's about how do we actually make sure we utilize them at the right time for the right purpose and don't lose track of them. Yeah.
Yeah, because, and I haven't been to one of the seminars, the events, the EOS events at all, but like there's not really a 2-day intensive toolbox training thing. It's more because there's too much going on in your 2-day to really truly learn all of those tools that are in that toolbox, right? There's a lot of them, right? And so it's easy to forget that they're there.
Yeah,
and
I hear you. I start thinking about that for my own clients. How do I make sure we actually keep those things top of mind? Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that, about the toolbox and the tools and what have you is just the discipline that we had put forth in the beginning in order to set our core values. And, and really where it's come into focus is I'd seen some other people developing their own core values after, like unrelated companies and what have you, and the way they've sort of rushed through it. And, where'd you get your core values? And I got them on Google, and, that kind of a thing. Right. And we struggled hard with ours. And it was really tedious process, but we're now very committed to it. And we have a reward system in place. It's kind of like a reward system / Facebook app that we use, Motivosity, where every staff gets a certain amount of money each month to reward another staff member for exercising a core value. Right. So committed to service excellence. I noticed that, a lady in the staff, Dorina, did a great job. I heard her on the phone with a customer and I can give her $2 or $5 or, the staff get a smaller amount of money than I do or what have you. But every staff member gets money every month to reward other staff members, but they have to call out a core value.
I love it. I really enjoy that. Actually, I must admit, so before I joined EOS, which is about 3 years now, I had been coaching with the Ice House and my own coaching business. And one of the things that I loved about the EOS proven process was that there is a fair bit of time spent not doing the core values and the vision and the mission and all that kind of stuff up front, but actually getting some tools in place first. So you actually get some changes in the business first. But then the amount of time that is spent actually discovering and defining those core values, as opposed to, I used to run sessions, I'm talking about way before EOS, where, we do a whole day in the room where we talk about what are the core values. We pick some beautiful core values, like, oh yeah, they're fantastic, we'll go with those. And they weren't really the core values of the organization. They were kind of more permission to play values. But also we'd leave that room very pumped and very excited about all this stuff we discovered. Then you go back out into the real world and nothing had changed. So as a consequence, you've got this beautiful long-term, vision and mission and plan, but you can't actually execute on it. And so when I came across EOS, I love the fact that that first day is spent getting some tools in place. Let's learn some tools that can actually change the way the business runs, and then we'll delve into that sort of the core values, core purpose, et cetera, et cetera.
We also ran a 16-week contest on the core values initiative, and it's called the CTO challenge, I think we called it, or something. And where it was kind of run like the game show with the letters and Vanna White.
Oh yeah, what is that called?
Oh my God, I can't believe I can't think of it right now.
Is that Wheel of Fortune?
Wheel of Fortune,
Yes.
yeah. Wheel of Fortune. So we had all the core values, and we basically made all sorts of posters and mouse pads and all sorts of what do you call it, promo items and the like, and we distributed it to the staff. And we had these every week. You'd have to guess a letter based on a clue that was inside of a core value, and you got to go to the website. You got to check the page where our core values are. You got to go to this and find out what, and if you take this and that, whatever, and you come up and you feel like the letter that week was R. And then you had to buy vowels, and the money for the vowels went to charity. And, but we ended up giving away a fair bit of money. I think the first prize was like $2,000, and then $1,750. And, there was full participation. Everyone participated. And it was great. But now the real funny thing is also checking your staff about, all right, give me the core values right now. Right.
Yeah. Yes.
That's really a good one.
So how many, I'm intrigued, how many do you actually have?
So our core values are committed to service excellence, solution driven, passionate contribution, and results matter.
Okay, great.
We have 4.
Yeah, 4.
Yeah.
I actually think 3 or 4 is an ideal number. I know we've got 5 at EOS, and I always get there eventually, but there's usually 4 that come to mind straight away, and the 5th one's usually like, what is it again?
Yeah.
So it's great, and I think, I know from experience that when you've got people who genuinely fit and live and breathe by those core values, it just makes the business a whole lot easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does indeed. Yeah. And we do, the whole it's the EOS mantra, I guess, of, hire, fire, reward, motivate, based on the core values. Right. Mm-hmm. And he's very, specific about that, and he reinforces that a lot. Yeah. And we have, sort of cycled through, a series of staff, and it's not that they're not good people or whatever, but the core values are not aligned, and, they go on and do things and end up somewhere better off for themselves or whatever, where they're more tightly aligned with in a different environment. Yep. But the people that we have now is a very tight group, and, works really well together. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Sounds like you're doing an amazing job. Hey, look, we're running out of time, sadly. I could sit here and talk all day. I love hearing about business success. But also, it's been interesting to hear, I think, that your story about losing sight of the core focus and growing to a point where it may look great from the outside, all these people, but in actual fact, it wasn't a profitable business anymore. That's a really interesting thing, I think, for people to think about. Are you really sticking to your core focus? Are you doing what is your core competency? Are you actually creating a profitable, sustainable business? Not just going for the size.
Right. Yeah,
so
for
thanks
sure.
for sharing that. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, 3 top tips. What will you say your 3 top tips are, Glenn? Whether that be across EOS, sales, life in general.
Yeah, so I always try to share something that's sort of like offbeat and not part of the book, and which is that. When you're building a business, and building a business is great for also for, building wealth and things like that. Mm-hmm. Right. So oftentimes, money can come as a byproduct. Obviously, if it becomes unsuccessful, there's no money. But nonetheless, if you're successful, the money becomes an obvious and apparent, byproduct of that. Yeah. Right. But oftentimes your health can be compromised in that process. Mm-hmm. And, from time to time over the years, I'd allowed my health and my health and my healthy habits, to suffer. Right. And, I've struggled a lot with, overeating because of stress, lack of exercise, not taking care of my health, and it's had impacts that, and when those things come up, the rest of it falls by the wayside immediately and becomes meaningless, right? Doesn't matter how much money you have if you're not healthy. Yep. So always put your health as a prime directive for, and we're not perfect, right? You're going to go through times of ups and downs and whatever and we're at the beginning of January, so everyone's recommitting everything, but nonetheless, keep an eye on your health at all times, and make sure, you don't put it aside in the, I'm, working long hours of day, not getting proper sleep, not eating correct, and maybe, drinking and things like that. Right. Yeah. So, Yeah. So that would be tip number 1.
Healthy habits. Yep.
Yeah. Tip number 2 is a funny thing from the book. Not funny, but it's a funny saying. And it's called, you only get forever to make another impression. And,
Right. Okay. Explain that.
and so it's like, wait a minute, that's not what my mom taught me.
Mm-hmm.
My mom told me that first impressions are lasting impressions.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, yes, that's true. And so is the second one and the third one. And so I said, so the story goes in the book is that, when you hear the boss's car pull up in the parking lot, he drives that sports car and, or you hear his footsteps or her footsteps coming down the hallway, be working really hard at that moment in time.
Yep.
And when he or she walks by your desk, do not be alt tabbing from Instagram over to the CRM,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because whether you like it or not, he noticed.
Yep.
And you made an impression, and it wasn't a good one, right? And so what I'm trying to say is that you're always making an impression. So always make a good impression. Oh, I was having a bad day. Oh, I was distracted because of such and such. No, like always be on. And, so I always have a habit, like if my bosses or if somebody important was in my vicinity or whatever, I would figure out a way of interacting with them. Hey, I just have a quick question on this project we're working on. Yep. And I was always on. And not, oh, hey, you got 27 minutes to hang around the water cooler talking about football, hockey, no, I mean, so you're always making an impression.
Yep.
So always make a good impression.
Love it. Yep.
Yeah.
And third and final?
Third tip?
Yep.
My third tip is never sit in the lobby, right? Because if you sit in the lobby and you're only 5'5" like me and a 6'4" president of a company walks out to meet you, he's like 4 feet above you when he walks in, towering over you. You're distracted on your phone, looking at Instagram because you were bored. Show up on time. Don't be too early and don't be late. Be standing there with nothing distracting you, and always have something in your hand and something in your mind. And that's the other tip, the bonus tip, which is, well, I got to go see the customer. What do? I said, well, just show up with something in your hand and something in your mind. It could be a data sheet. It could be, a brochure. It could be the quotation that they asked for. It could be a box of donuts, which are very popular in Canada. I don't know about down there. It could, but always have something in your hand to give to them, and always have something in your mind that you're there to talk to them about.
I love that.
Don't be, and those are some of my tips. And there's 57 more in the book.
Which is actually called Never Sit in the Lobby. So that's a great sort of ending for it. Yeah. Thank you. It was interesting. This takes me back to the times when I actually, my original, what do you call it? My original career was actually in sales as well. So I used to work for the pharmaceutical companies selling drugs into doctors.
Oh, yeah.
Tough job that, because, you spend a lot of time in waiting rooms. And the thing that I actually used to do is I used to go in with a little basket of gifts, and I'd actually ask both the receptionist and the doctor to take a gift from the basket, and I'd use it to start a conversation about various things about the drug.
Perfect.
And it was just something I wanted to do because I was bored of sitting in waiting rooms. It was so much more fun to go in and do something like that.
Yeah.
But the rapport that you can build through just having a bit of fun with it, not just being as serious as all the other medical reps were that came in, day out. I'm here to talk to you about XYZ drugs. So something in my hand, and I guess something in my mind as well.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Hey. And never bring donuts after 10:30 because people get mad at you because you're getting too close to lunch, right?
Fair enough,
So you got to have something different if it's that's just a joke we have, but so
brilliant. Okay, so obviously people can get hold of the book Never Sit in the Lobby. That's obviously on things like Amazon and your various bookstores. How do they get in contact with you, Glenn, if they want to speak to you?
So I have my website, glennpoulos.com. There's 2 N's in Glenn. So GLENNPOULOS.com. And all the links to socials are there. Where you'll see I'm most active is on LinkedIn, and really, really highly engaged on LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody. So anyone can feel free to message me at any time on LinkedIn, but I'm on Facebook and Instagram and the other applications as well. But and you can also my email address and everything's on the website, and happy to take an email from you and get back to you as well. Happy to talk about anything.
Glenn, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and sharing your tips and things with the listeners. I shall look forward to seeing you hopefully pretty soon, actually, in Canada itself.
That's right.
Thanks for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Debra.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.